Hey, my name is Drake Peoples. I'm doing my apprenticeship at Roseland Funeral Home in Decatur, Alabama, and I'm a member of the Funeral Service Education Program at Jefferson State Community College. This is part 2 of our assignment for Funeral Psychology and Sociology. For this assignment, we were asked to find an article or a chapter in a book that related to both psychology and sociology, as well as funeral directing, and implement it into our profession. This is the second portion of this, the audio portion that goes with the paper we were asked to write. For this assignment, I looked and I looked and I looked, and I couldn't really find anything that interested me enough to write about until I ran across an article by Tara Bailey and Tommy Walter entitled Funerals Against Death. And what this pertains with is something we don't really consider much, and that is the actual importance of the audience at our funerals. You know, everybody talks about, as funeral directors, our number one prerogative is to make the family happy. And the decedent, we're supposed to make the decedent look good. We're supposed to present the decedent in a way that's satisfying to the family. And if the family's happy at the end of the day, then we were successful. But nobody really ever considers how important the audience is to us and the way we run our funerals, as well as how important they are to the family and the way the family really deals with it. I think of the funerals a lot as such an importance because it's one of those things in life that you only get one shot at. You get one shot to bury your mother. You get one shot to bury your brother. And if anything deviates or goes wrong, then it can leave a scar. It can leave a mark that will taint your memory for all your lasting memories about that loved one if it goes wrong. And like I said, no one really ever considers how the congregation really applies to that. So like I said, for this article I ran across, it's called Funerals Against Death. And this is actually an article that was written in the UK. It was a survey that was sent out to a mass of people. And it was a general demographic, and they were asked just to describe their feelings and their reactions at the last funeral they went to. And in doing this, they aimed to really stay away from the arrangement process and that last funeral being one of a loved one. They just wanted a general idea of how people reacted and what people thought about and how they went about going to a funeral service. So this is actually a really long article that made quite a few good points that I would really recommend you read through the article. It's really interesting. But I picked out 2 or 3 that I really thought were important to us as funeral directors and tried to emphasize those in this presentation. The first is that they really compared the funeral process to a play. When you go to a play and you see the importance of a play, and you see how a play turns out, you've got 3 main entities that go into making that play what that play was. You've got your director, your cast, and then of course the audience. So hypothetically speaking, we as the funeral directors are the directors of the play, with the family being the cast, who are very important, and our main objective is to get the cast on cue. Make the cast as happy as possible, get the cast doing exactly what we need them to do. But without the audience, who are you putting on the play for? Why would you be out there presenting yourself with no audience to give their feedback? Now, like I said, this was all based on a survey that sent out to a really general demographic. The way it turned out, I think about 50% of them were of elderly, 50 plus. I guess a lot of people generally define that as elderly, but for me at least, elderly. So the first point that was brought up was that the audience really relates to the feel of the ceremony. The funeral ceremony itself is such an important thing for the family with the closure. And like I said earlier, it can leave a mark. It can be damaging if it's wrong. And it really puts forth the relationship that the crowd has with the family. like I said, a few points that I really pulled out that I thought were important to us as funeral directors, and that we really need to consider more when we're actually actively directing funerals. The first of which was the fact they really brought out the new point that a lot of us do think about, but don't really comprehend the importance of the turnout. I know everyone's worked funerals where there's been 10 people there, and I know I personally worked funerals where there's been thousands. And that turnout, as stated in the article itself, can have a very deep psychological impact on the family. And now myself, I've got a mixed feeling about that, but we'll get to that later. A few other things that the article pointed out was the social stature of the people in attendance. You know, who shows up? Does your next door neighbor show up, or does the mayor of the town show up? Another one I thought was really interesting, though, that I really never thought of, was that the audience of a funeral actually is more of a living, breathing, moving eulogy. And that all comes with the people that show up, how they're dressed, how they act, who they are, groups, clubs, organizations, anything from fraternal organizations like the Eastern Stars, or your golf friends, or your civic acts, your clubs, anything of that nature. And it also gives them the opportunity to find comfort in that. It's more of a moving eulogy to the family, and that can also have an impact both positively and negatively on the family themselves based on who they see at the funeral. So as I dove into this, I want to read the second paragraph of my synopsis so you can get an idea of this article itself before I dive off into the meaning of the article, in my opinion. One of the main responses put forward was the number in attendance in relation to the feel of the ceremony. The survey suggests that turnout directly corresponds to the attitude of the bereaved family. It was shown that more people attended the funeral, the more the family felt comforted by the feeling of importance and stature that a deceased family member had. This also rang true of the social stature of the people in attendance. On the opposite side of that assertion, it was found that funerals were looked at as darker and more dejected with few in attendance. The other point I focused on in the article is the importance of the attendees' presence as sort of a figure of eulogy. It discusses differences in the thinking of the family and seeing the life lived by their loved one through the nature of the people who arrive, such as social groups, organizations, and fraternal entities. This allows the family the opportunity to see and find comfort in the company kept by the relative, or possibly the opposite effect. So like I said, it's a really long article, and I've got a link included, and I would suggest everyone read into it because it was very interesting. But those are the two really main points that jumped out to me, and I'm sure everyone as young, aspiring funeral directors, that we really need to be focused on and try to maintain our timeline. So when I really ran across this article, like I said, the first thing that really jumped out was, when we're thinking and when we're training and we're on the job in our apprenticeship, and you got funeral directors pointing this way, this way, they're telling you, go see the family, go make the family, go check the makeup, go check this, go check that, go make sure the family's got what they need. So this entire time, but you're not actually considering the rest of the audience, the other people that have shown up for this funeral. So the first one that I really kind of dove into was the fact that really depending on the basic marks of who showed up. Just the very basis of that assertion. And what I thought of was, I've had funerals where it's been going great. It's been going perfect. Perfect day, perfect, everything's going right the way it should, and then one person shows up. One person that's unwelcome, one person that's not liked, one person that's going to try and steal the spotlight, and it always ends up bad. Every time. I've seen everything from guests coming in who have nothing to do with the family that walk up and see the decedent and pass out. I've seen other times for everything from yelling and screaming matches, feelings hurt, crying, to fist fights in the cemetery. I've seen it all. And That one person showing up took that memory of the perfect service from that family, took it from them. One person, there could be 500 other people here, but that one person detracted it from the entire thing and ruined it. So that's something we have to consider with the crowd. And actively as funeral directors, we've always got somebody standing at the front door. You got in the back of your mind to remember that and really try and pull that out. And when people walk in and you see them and especially if the family's told you that's happened to us before, don't let them in that door. You've got to understand, you've got to know how to react and how to stop that situation from happening. And that's a very important part of our job, so we don't consider it much because it doesn't happen much. The one I had mixed feelings about was the psychological effect on the family with the number of people that showed up. Because I really see both sides of that. We have people in here sometimes that are 98 years old who sadly most of their friends and acquaintances have died off. And there's 15 people show up to this funeral. But at the same time, that 98-year-old woman has children, grandchildren, maybe great-grandchildren, sisters, brothers that all still really care for them. And I've seen funerals of 10, 15 people that are some of the strongest, most emotional services I've had, just because the love in the building outbalanced the number of people there. But on the opposite end of that, when I first started my apprenticeship last year, we had a 19-year-old boy that was killed in a motorcycle accident. And the family was a wreck. I mean, barely holding together. Everybody could not take it. And I honestly thought it was going to be a nightmare. I didn't know what we were going to do. I didn't know if they were going to be able to hold it together. And then 600-700 people showed up to the funeral. I'm not talking the visitation, the funeral. Every seat in the house was full. Standing room only everywhere. We had them in the lobby with the speakers on. Outside with the speakers on. Could not find enough room for everybody. And I sincerely believe that's the only way that mother made it through that service. She was so upset until all those people started showing up and sharing stories and letting her know how much they cared for her son, how much they loved her son, and how important he was to them. And that brought her strength. And without that, I don't know if she'd have made it. So I really see both ends of that argument, and I'm kind of in the middle, because I've seen where the number has affected the entire process, but I've also seen instances where it hasn't. One of my favorite families I've ever worked with was the very first pre-need family I took care of. They were from out of town. The gentleman's wife had passed on. He only had one living son. They lived in Florida. The old man lived up here. He passed on, and the only two people that were at his service was his son and his wife. But they were the most kind people. We had a beautiful service. One of our local preachers came in, and they still keep in communication today because they were so touched. And it was still such a loving service with just them two there. So in my opinion, number doesn't really matter in the right sense. But on other occasions, it really can. But I do agree with the point about the living eulogy. I've noticed it, but I've never actually sat back and thought about it. We had a gentleman the other day who was one of the founding members and the chaplain of the American Legion Freedom Riders. For those of you who don't know, that's a group of the American Legion that rides around on motorcycles and does charity acts. And he also did a lot in the community. He was a very active member of his church, and he was well loved. And that was the most awesome service I've ever been a part of. I mean, hundreds of people showed up. The American Legion came with flags all down the driveway. There was a motorcycle procession. Everybody was decked out. Everybody was so proud to have known this man. He was retired from the Army, so we had full military honors with a group from Montgomery that came up. It was a beautiful service. And all the people that showed up, from the church members to the American Legion, to all his motorcycle friends, to all his community people came up, and we had 5, 6, 7, 10 people come up during the funeral and just speak about how awesome a man he was. And it was moving. It was touching. And it was. I never thought about it in that sense, but it was a moving, living eulogy to the life that man lived. And that wouldn't have been a part of the service if the crowd wouldn't have shown up. If the crowd wasn't important in our society, in our sociological views, in our funeral, right? If the crowd was unimportant and they did not show up and it was just the family members of the decedent, sometimes we wouldn't even have a funeral. Other times, it would not be near the same on scale, on emotion, on love and kindness. It would not be near the same if we didn't have the crowd show up with the family. But on the other side of that, I've never personally seen this, but when I was just considering the counter argument for that living eulogy, what if you're an 18-year-old and you die in a car accident, and your mother's expecting all your high school buddies and your church friends and everybody to come, and the people that actually show up are the exact opposite of who she's expecting? What if it's, heaven forbid, just druggies? What if you hung out with the wrong crowd? What if you were into some stuff you shouldn't have been into? What if the crowd you were hanging out with and your friends weren't who your family thought they were? And I just really considered how that could really rock a family if someone were to show up that they weren't expecting in a bad way. And like I said, I've personally never seen that happen. The living eulogy has always been a good thing that's come from it. I've never seen an instance where people have shown up that the family wasn't expecting. But, like I said, that was just the counter argument that I came up with, and I can see the other side of that. But all in all, this was a very interesting article to look at. I said it took me a while to figure out something to write about because I couldn't find anything that sparked me. You know, it was difficult. I looked for a while on some stuff about children and some other things, but then this article really jumped out at me about the importance of the crowd at the funeral services. And that's something we, as funeral directors, really need to consider more than we do, because they do hold a much more important role in the service than we give them credit for. And I think that this should help us in remembering that and sharpening our skills, and really help the way we direct services and really perfect our craft if we consider all aspects of the service, including the crowd. Because if you have the play and the cast goes out and does exactly what the director says and puts on a beautiful, heartwarming performance, but the director is the only one in the crowd clapping, who are they doing it for? So we really need to, as funeral directors, keep ourselves just in the back of our mind that the other 100 people sitting in the chapel can be just as important as the 10 sitting in the family room. Whether directly or indirectly, they are going to affect your service, and we have to know how to handle it, both negatively and positively. So that's really what I came up with. Like I said, I'm going to have a link with this for you to check out the article, because I thought it was really cool. I do appreciate your time. Thank you.